Greetings everybody. Today's video lecture talks about liberalism. We're moving into a more theoretical section of the course. I mean, we're always talking about theory when we're talking about policy, but here we're going to really stop and pause and think about the theoretical and how it relates to social policy processes. Some people complain that theory is a little bit dry, and certainly this section of the course is a bit more dense than some of the other sections, and it does deal with some more abstract concepts, but hopefully I'll be able to root these in some examples, and you'll find the material interesting, if not positively fascinating. Mahan presents to us a theoretical perspective about the role of liberalism in Canadian social policy and the way in which liberalism is really a fundamental part of Canada's orientation. The liberalism that we're talking about today is not a party politics, it's a theoretical understanding, and it's a practice of that theoretical understanding. Because the lecture is quite dense, I've broken the lecture down into a couple of different pieces: classical liberalism and social liberalism, and then neoliberalism, inclusive liberalism, and post-liberalism. Hopefully the shorter lectures will be a bit more easy to manage, and you'll be able to absorb a little bit more from each of the lectures. So when we're talking about liberalism, we're talking about a perspective that developed as part of the Enlightenment movement, or what sometimes is described as the Age of Reason. This happened around the 18th century, so the 1700s. Here, there was a move away from the supremacy of the monarchy and the churches, and there was more attention to scientific ways of knowing and what was understood as reason or rational thought. Reason and authority were tied together under this theory. So the capacity to separate emotion and mysticism from ways of understanding the world were seen as very important. There was greater religious and political tolerance than there had been previously during this particular era. But I think it's important to emphasize tolerance, as in like you smell but I can hold my breath, or like that headache really hurts but I can just pretend it's not there and get through it, rather than saying there was an embracing of difference. There was a curiosity about other ways of knowing and obtaining scientific knowledge from other areas of the globe. But again, it was more of a colonial process of obtaining and then claiming as one's own. So this liberalism attended to the state as an institution that was designed to promote individual rights. Previously the state and the church were tied to honoring the monarch, and so promoting the needs and desires and benefits of the monarchy. But here we have a separation of those things, and we see that the state is designed to protect individual rights by protecting against the potential that there could be interference with individual rights. So aggressors, as they are described, could be the church or the monarchy, or external forces like other countries or other religious organizations that might seek to claim some kind of right to controlling or managing individuals. The quote from John Locke talks about the relationship between the same species and rank and the notion of promiscuity. The quote really means that people who are equal should therefore be equal under all laws, and they should have access to the same advantages and the same resources. The promiscuity here doesn't mean a sort of sexual freedom or a lack of sexual morality. Here it's talking about the relationship between access to legal standing and your family lineage. Prior to the French Revolution, people who were deemed illegitimate, they were unable to claim a right to a particular father or to membership in a particular family through birth, We're not protected by many laws, and we're not entitled to inheritance. But here, Locke is saying that those laws no longer stand, that you don't have to have a particular birthright in order to be protected by the law. Of course, Locke is talking about white men who owned property. These were the people who were protected under this particular kind of liberalism. So it's a broadening of the definition, but it doesn't create an inclusive context. While we might think of liberalism as embracing particular values and morals, in fact, the only value that classical liberalism really embraces, well, maybe there's two, is the free market and the free individual. There are no particular values or virtues that are embraced or endorsed by classical liberalism. A person has a right to define their concept of the good life any way they want. And so long as they have the resources to actualize that good life, they're free to do so. They shouldn't be interfered with. A particular good life shouldn't be promoted over another kind of good life. But there is no advocacy under classical liberalism for collectivity or collective possibilities. There is no alignment of people to create resources for those who don't have resources to actualize their good life. You've either got them or you don't. If you've got them, use them however you want. And if you don't, well, sorry. Maybe you can be innovative and go to the market, create something that people want. So classical liberalism does not tell people what to do and what not to do. It protects individuals who are white men who own land from interference from outside. It protects them from the creation of laws that could tell them what to do and how to do it. Classical liberalism also promotes the idea of the private. So the choice and value that we talked about previously are endorsed within the context of the individual's private capacity, their private space, their private business, their private land. The state is really designed to counter any kind of phenomena that could influence or affect the capacity of the individual to actualize their preferred good life within the context of their own private space. So there is a very strong link between liberalism and the colonial, in that there's a desire to kind of tame nature and to bring it into some kind of order so that it can serve the well-being and will of the individual. There is what's described as a respect for the person's natural rights to liberty and equality. But again, you have to have the resources to actualize the kind of liberty and equality that the individual sees as what they want. Mahan reminds us that there's a difference between being a liberal as a system of belief, and liberalism as a practice. So he talks about the difference between being liberal and doing liberal. So being liberal is maintaining a particular value system and orienting one's value system in these beliefs, whereas liberalism is the enactment of the value systems through behaviors. So it's a performed belief. When we talk about doing liberalism, we often talk about political economy, with the economy being understood as a system of exchange. We think about how we exchange the values of liberalism for particular sets of actions that are understood to reflect those values made manifest. It's about bringing to bear the values and beliefs on the social world, using them beyond a kind of theoretical or way of thinking. So we express the values of liberalism, the supremacy of the individual, the right to define one's own morality and to express one's own desires within the context of the private. We do this by developing policies, goals, and actions within the political realm, within the social realm. And so we understand liberal as political in nature because it's about bringing to bear the sentiments and desires that are understood as the liberal, as a kind of practice within the social world. When we start to make liberalism manifest beyond just kind of a theoretical way of thinking, we are beginning to see how liberalism can become a kind of nuanced understanding. Different ways of understanding the ideological positioning of liberalism, or the values that are oriented in liberalism, results in a kind of nuanced expression of the perspective. So we think about liberalism as following a kind of continuum of political orientations, with some inter-regime differences, or some slight differences in the ways in which various groups of people in a political context, in the political economy, express liberalism. And so we understand this as how we account for the differences in the values, beliefs, policies, and actions that are understood to reflect liberalism. But the liberalism should be foundational. It should allow us to trace back the way in which these things are nuanced and presented to the kind of original thinking. It's like a ladder that you can climb up and down. You take the theoretical and you build steps or phases of expression of that particular sentiment. And we can go up the ladder, create a new way of expressing it, and follow the logic back to the original theory. This is one of the tenets of liberalism. You have to be able to express how the values are aligned and expressed in order to be able to bring them back to the original action or sentiment within the theoretical. So it demands a kind of coherence. It reflects that rational era of the Enlightenment period. The differences in the way liberalism is expressed gets described in various kinds of adapted forms of liberalism. Right now we're going to talk about social liberalism. We're going to eventually talk about liberal humanism. We're going to talk about neoliberalism, and we're going to talk about post-liberalism. I think I covered them all. Not all in this lecture, but as we move through the material. So social liberalism still claims the importance of the individual in society. In fact, the individual is still seen as the most important union in society. And the individual has a right to freedom from unnecessary state intervention. But it does acknowledge that there are issues with the capitalist economic system and the free market. It acknowledges that there are winners and losers in this particular political economy, in this free market system of exchange. So it suggests that because there are some problems with this particular system, that the state has a role to play in controlling the market in order to promote individual freedoms and to support individuals' participation in the economy. So adjustments may be made to the supports that families can access within the market so that they can still participate. There is an ideal of the male breadwinner as a fundamental tradition within social liberalism, which again harkens back to the time when the white male landowner was understood really as the individual. It also expresses preference for the nuclear family, for the heteronormative nuclear family as the ideal. It also suggests that there are particular individuals within society who may be more vulnerable to the effects of the market, and therefore an investment in these individuals is seen as necessary in order for them to be able to continue to express themselves as individuals and to participate in the free market. Gray reminds us that liberals see change as progressive. It's a development at the social level. When change is enacted, it's enacted to produce a better good. In 1969, Pierre Elliott Trudeau, father of Justin Trudeau, revoked the sodomy law. In a speech sometimes referred to as "the state has no business in the bedrooms of the nation," he removed a law that essentially made homosexuality illegal in Canada, saying or stating that individuals had a right to define their own sexual morality and to express that morality in their actions and behaviors in their own private space. There's a lot of arguments about what the notion of private space does in the context of something like sodomy laws, but that's a whole other lecture and perhaps even another course. But this live and let live philosophy reflects a classical liberal approach. But social liberalism invites us to intervene when the family or the individual become overwhelmed by social circumstances, and where these circumstances prevent the market from responding to whatever is occurring. If we think about COVID-19 and the introduction of the CERB by Justin Trudeau, we can see this aspect of liberalism come to life. The market was essentially shut down by the need to quarantine. Many families didn't have the resources necessary to respond to family members' sudden unemployment. It could have been a real mess if something like the CERB wasn't introduced by the government. This income support program provided financial resources to families so they could continue to participate in the market, pay their rent, pay their mortgages, buy groceries, buy gasoline, other necessities of life, heating, cooling. Similarly, the government has provided lots of money to pharmaceutical companies and a guarantee of the purchase of successful vaccines if the pharmaceutical companies are prepared to take the risk of developing a vaccine for COVID-19. By introducing resources into the pharmaceutical market, the government, the Trudeau government, is essentially producing a future good which will allow individuals to continue to participate in the free market, to be well, and to be able to contribute and to actualize their good life as they might understand it. So these are sort of two examples of the removal of a prohibition and the introduction of resources in order to promote the well-being of individuals within our society. This concludes the lecture on liberalism. I hope that you found it interesting. I know it's a bit dense and kind of complicated, but I think you'll get it. I'm pretty sure you've got this. And so I'll look forward to talking with you during our Zoom meeting soon.